All right. So welcome to the Climate Action Advisory Board meeting for September 16th. And it says on the agenda to go over Zoom. I think we're all Zoom experts by now, so I think we're pretty good there. Minutes and upcoming meetings. Did everyone have a chance to read through the minutes before the meeting?
Yes.
Couple of head shaking. Okay. Do we want to have any kind of discussion of the minutes? Is there anyone who has anything that they'd point out that they'd like to have changed? Seeing none. Anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. By a show of hands, all those in favor of approving the minutes from August 26th?
I abstain.
Abstain. I like that, Brian. All right. So almost unanimous with one abstention. And we've gone ahead and approved the minutes. Our next upcoming meeting is October 21st. And we're going to try to keep the 6 o'clock time. Because I feel that is what we found to work relatively well for schedules. And then, so October 21st, November 18th, and December 16th are the meetings through the end of the year. And next is the chair's...
The clerk's schedule says 5 still, just a minor note.
Oh, thanks, I'll fix that.
Okay. Yeah, mine, I'm looking at the one-pager agenda and it's showing 6. So, all right, well, with the chair's update, town meeting is passed, but it's on our agenda for later on, so there's not much to talk about there. We met about 3 weeks ago, so there's really not been a lot to update everyone on. And so I think we're moving right along in the agenda. I don't have much to update the meeting on. I did, one update I can do from this morning is I attended the chair's breakfast, and they're already switching a lot of chairs for the different committees in town, which we've got to do next on our agenda. And I was happy to be able to say that they're asking for people who need volunteers for their committees and so forth. I think I was the only committee to say that we have more people asking to be on CAB than we have positions open. So that's a good thing. All right. So moving on.
Can we sell our seats? I mean, how valuable is it?
Well, yeah, you know.
Tough times.
I know. All right. Well,
yeah, Brian, one thing about the chair's breakfast that, you know, I think you had mentioned, or the board had mentioned earlier about, as we go forward, to start thinking about people that we would invite to the CAB meeting that are chairing these committees and start to get a little bit better business relationship. Maybe that's something we could think about if they're starting to identify who these leaders are throughout the town.
That's what the chair's breakfast is for. So for example, someone on the planning committee, citizens were asking them about how to deal with the Starbucks parking lot. And they were unsure what committee to redirect them to. And there's a traffic calming committee in town, but it's gathers as needed. So that's what it ended up being, that they needed as a resource. So similar, if a committee is talking about something that they do that's related to sustainability, the chair should speak up for this committee and say, we're willing to help and offer to make that connection. That's the purpose of that meeting. Okay. All right. So
Okay.
Any other thoughts on the update? No? All right. So next on our agenda is election of new officers. So clerk and chair are the two office positions. We've been doing a going around the list to do who's doing clerk. Do we want to keep that as a method, or would someone like to volunteer to clerk all of the meetings until the next town meeting? I didn't expect to see any volunteers for that. So I think
just-
we'll keep with the norm.
I will say we have some fine clerks in this committee, myself excluded.
Right. Shared
I like-
responsibility.
Yeah, I like dividing the labor.
Okay. Warren, we can't hear you.
Do we have someone doing it tonight?
Very good
Good
question.
question.
I don't even know who's on the list. Kate, do you happen to know?
Hi, Pam.
Hi. I did it last time, so I'm off.
You're
Okay.
off at least for 8 times, right?
It's
Ruthie.
Supposed to be Ruthie.
Ruthie.
Ruthie's up.
Oop.
Ruthie,
Ruthie.
he's giving you a thumbs up.
Now, who's up for the next meeting?
I'm November.
I think you
Warren.
it's in the packet, I think. Didn't you?
Warren, yeah.
Yeah.
Warren.
I figured I'd try to stick it in the packet every month so that,
That's helpful.
a
Yeah.
reminder
Yes,
for
right.
who's next.
It is helpful.
So I'll update that with,
But there's one problem, which is I have a college prep meeting.
Which is why I brought up who's next, because maybe Warren and Ruthie want to trade.
Sure, I could do tonight.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Warren. So Warren can be clerk tonight, and Ruthie, you'll have to stick with us for the whole November meeting.
Kate, when are you getting that staff that you were talking about that we're going to be able to support the board?
wouldn't that be nice? Well, the good news about Zoom meetings is they're recorded, so it makes doing the minutes easy. If you miss something, you can go back and
Right, that certainly
take
helped
notes of
me.
it.
Yeah.
All right. So that, yes, we'll get there on need for help. But I wanted to go on to the next agenda item, which is the new officer. So if we're going to do clerk as the continuing going around, I don't want to be chair. I've had fun being chair, but I'd love to hand off the reins. And so I have thought about this, and I think that Jake would be a great chair. So I'd like to nominate him, but unless
I
someone else.
second that.
But we might want to ask Jake.
Let's have a discussion.
We want to ask
No, we
Jake
want to second it
first.
before Jake can answer.
Yeah, all right. I'll say-
Sucker him in.
Right now, before anything, you say, yes, it's Jake.
Okay. Well, so does anyone else want to nominate anyone else? I want to make sure that opportunity is there.
I'm happy. Jake would be great. I was also thinking, I mean, any other number of people would be great. So I don't know, does Jake want to do this and more affirmatively than anybody else does? Or is this just something that you thought was a good outcome, Brian? So I guess my question is, are there other interested members who would like to step up for this? Not me. I'm totally not interested in doing that.
I can just confirm that I am interested. I'm definitely committed to it. I recognize there's some additional work, but I think I'm hopeful I can bring the group together and help us, ensure that we're collaborating, that we're building consensus and really helping to implement, the plan that we've all worked on. So chatted a little bit with Kate and Brian about it. So happy to throw my hat in the ring, and but of course, absolutely want to make sure if anyone else is interested, please speak up, and we'll figure it out.
Well, that's exactly what I was looking for. I just wanted to make sure that this is something that you have affirmatively thought about and want to do, and also to make sure that nobody else has, a competing interest, because if that were true, then we should talk it out. But if there is no competing interest on anybody else's part, this is a fabulous outcome, it seems to me.
I thought that was a great campaign speech.
Yeah, I was thinking.
I'm in.
Yeah, I thought that was a terrific mission statement. So I think it's correct.
Yeah,
It's
so
great.
I didn't bring it on Jake this moment. I talked to him earlier, but I want to make sure
You
that,
paved it.
if someone else did have that burning desire to be chair, that they did have that opportunity, Pam. So, I came here expecting that no one was going to have that burning desire. So I went out and found somebody to rope into it.
I'm the only really naive one here that didn't realize what I'm getting into. That's okay.
No, I think it's terrific. I mean, just the way you stated, bringing the board together, getting consensus, getting a sense of direction, our priorities will be very helpful. So I love what you said.
Great.
And
Yeah,
thank you,
thanks,
Brian, for your leadership.
Yeah, thank
over
you,
the
Brian.
last year plus.
Well, we still
has
have to vote you in.
awesome.
That's true.
Well, I seconded
All right,
his
so we got a
nomination.
second. All right. All those in favor of Jake being chair, raise your hands. All right, we're good.
Unanimous.
I guess I'll-
Hey.
All right, now you can thank me and I'll go on. And I want to offer to Jake, do you want to run the meeting for tonight, or would you rather I finish this one out and you can take over fresh from the new one, whichever you wish?
It would be great if you don't mind finishing this one out, just because I did miss the last one, and I know there's a couple of things on here I think are continuations and wasn't sort of planning on that. So
Sure.
that would
Sure.
be great.
I just didn't want to put you on the spot. Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. So great. We have a plan going forward. And next on the agenda is Kate and her director's update.
Well, is there going to be a vice chair?
Do we have a vice chair? We haven't had one in the past.
We have not had one in the past. We've needed one a few times.
John, you want to be one?
No.
I'll nominate John.
Done.
That's what
I'll
happens,
second
John.
that. I'll second that.
Quick, vote.
John.
John, you haven't learned that as soon as you
Yeah.
comment,
Yeah.
that's where you fall out.
It does look like he's in Hawaii, so he's far away.
It's wishful thinking.
We
He's so
have,
relaxed, he'll agree to anything.
In the past, we've had someone nominated to fill in for that meeting as chair or so forth. Like, for example, when I was talking about Article 30 or 31, someone else would step in for those portions of the meeting.
This would be more efficient, wouldn't it, to have a vice chair? I mean, is John offering to do it?
No.
He keeps shaking his head no. He likes the idea but doesn't want to do the work.
No.
Could I nominate John?
I just
and-
like to come up with the ideas. Yeah.
We already nominated and seconded John and still didn't work.
Yeah. Well, so
John, are
Ken,
you declining actually?
What's that?
Are you declining to be vice
Yeah,
chair?
I'm not I'm not a good person to be in office right now.
all right.
Ruthie, what do you think? Ruthie, what do you think? Would you like to do that? You substituted last session, and I thought you were brilliant.
Oh, flattery. Nice job, Mike. I would be happy to, but I'm not as available as other folks. Like, I feel like I miss a number of meetings. So that's my only concern, is that I'm not as consistent as others are in terms of attendance.
Well, we haven't had a vice chair before. It doesn't look like anyone would like to create the position and be in on it. So why don't we keep it as is and just replace the current, keep the round robin of clerking and have chair move to Jake.
Can we revisit that next meeting in case someone other than myself would
Decides
like
they
to
want to
volunteer?
be.
Because I agree. I think it would be foundationally a good thing if someone does want to do it.
I am right there with you, Brian and Pam, on the idea of a vice chair being a good one, but it's getting someone who wants to do it.
Well, let's just confirm, this is not a lot of heavy lifting, you guys. I mean, I can't do it because I don't think I'm going to be around as much, but it isn't heavy lifting and it would make an efficiency. I mean, Brian, what about you or, Courtney or Michael McAteer or who hasn't categorically refused as has I? No, seriously, I mean, it isn't a lot of heavy lifting.
It's just a fill-in, right?
It's
what
a
we're
fill-in
talking
role.
about.
Yeah.
But having
I'm
it
happy
official.
to fill in if I can be there. So I just, I don't want to waste the spot if, I'm
Yep.
just not as available as other folks. So I guess what I would say is, Jake, if you're not going to be there, just ask somebody to step in. We don't need a vice chair, right? Does that work for you? Mr. Chair?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. If, you know, if folks think about it and they're really interested in kind of serving as a vice chair, then we can talk about it at the next meeting or the one after. So happy to kind of reach out as needed until then.
Yeah, and I'm always willing to help out if needed, but I just didn't want to pick up a new title. I'm trying to focus my own workload.
Great.
Great.
Okay. So Kate, would you like to do your director's update?
Sure. So this one's a little shorter than usual since we just met 3 weeks ago, and one of those weeks I was on vacation. But a few updates. The final report from Abigail, our summer fellow, is up on the website. So take a look at that when you get a minute. She did a really great job, and the select board asked her to come present her work, which was really nice, and she did a great job. So she, was already done, but came back to do that presentation. Climate Preparedness Week is next week. So I've been collaborating with the library to set up some virtual programming. Last year we participated in this Climate Prep Week, and we had some in-person events. Obviously this year is different, but we got some film screenings and some presentations, and there's a number of children's events too. So check out that schedule. I think it's coming together nicely. And then a save the date for an EV event in lieu of doing a ride and drive this year. We're planning this roundtable, and I'm realizing the date is wrong in my update. It's actually October 20th, not the 10th. So it's going to be a virtual event where dealers will be there to share what vehicles they have and answer questions. And attendees get a free copy of Brian's favorite magazine, The Electric Car Insider, which he's probably going to show you right now. So sign up if you are not an EV driver yet, but plan to be. And then lastly, I guess ending
2018.
Not as.
I'm still waiting. They say they're going to deliver on Thursday the new version, so I'll have some to give out. If anyone's interested in getting a car, it's a great way to find out about plug-in cars. Sorry to interrupt, Kate.
Oh,
Just
no
too
worries.
excited.
My last update is, I realize, is ending not on as cheerful of note. We were notified that we did not get the MVP Action Grant funding this year, which was a major bummer because I thought our application was great. Obviously, I'm quite biased, but it sounds like it was a pretty competitive round. And so they just released this week the list of communities that got the grants and what they received, what the project title was. So I imagine we'll get more information in the coming months about what those projects entailed and give us a better sense of, how we might do better next time. And we also request feedback from the state on our particular application, help us be more successful next time. So
do you know who got awarded the grant?
Yeah, they just put out a press release this week. It's quite a long list. They gave out $11 million. Yeah, it's I can share if folks are interested.
Can you remind us what our project was?
This was for the Integrated Water Resource Management Plan, which is one of the priorities in our Climate Action Plan. And so we requested pretty big grant to do kind of an 18-month, 2-year project in 2 phases. So, we'll give it another go.
Yeah, and
Kate, was that the only initiative that we saw embedded in that grant? Was it what you just stated? There was nothing
Yeah,
else?
it was just the one application.
so but that project we can still apply next year, or we can seek other funding sources for that as well.
Yeah, they're gonna do another grant round in the spring, they said, so.
Okay.
Cool.
And is it so we applied for this one project, but I'm sure there's other MVP applicable climate plan projects that we could apply as well.
Mm-hmm.
Are we competing against ourselves if we put in an application for this project and for we are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the update.
Can I, this is Jane, can I ask a quick question on this?
Sure.
It would be really interesting to know if there were any other water efficiency or integrated water projects that were in the running, or whether that's just an area that we've pushed the boundaries because Concord is thinking more proactively than others in this space.
It's a good question. I skimmed through the list and I didn't see any that were integrated water. So that is possible. I mean, there were some that were more like coastal resilience in terms of water, like being resilient to sea level rise, which obviously is not us. But I don't, Courtney, do you have a better sense? I know you're in the loop on these projects.
The list that I saw was a lot of action. So actually projects going in the ground and or, you know, facility rehab for resilience. So shoring up, you know, facilities that might be critical facilities that might be experiencing coastal flooding or riverine flooding from big events. So it is called an action grant, and maybe that's, you know, on purpose, even though I think the integrated plan speaks well to, you know, what they're trying to do in terms of criteria and that sort of thing. But that's what I saw from the list that was that was awarded, was a lot of, you know, like going in the ground sort of things.
That was my instinct, and that's why I was asking the question. And there may
Yeah.
also be other ways to use this project to educate not just this grant cycle, but other areas of government granting.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because
I mean,
now its socialization process has started.
I think something else interesting to note, there was $10 million was what they had to give out, and they divvied it up between 40 projects, but there were 140 projects that applied. So it was very competitive this time. I think probably the most competitive round they've seen. So people are starting to become aware of it, and so it's gonna be trickier to get the money. Not to say that it was easy at first, but just,
I think it was easier. I mean, now they said that it's the majority of communities are now MVP certified. So, you know, even more so it seems in our green communities. So it's available to a lot of communities. So it's not surprising that it was.
There's really more MVP communities than green communities?
That's interesting.
I'll have to check, but when I saw the press release on the number of MVP, it just looked much higher than what I had.
Yeah.
I don't know, John, do you know?
Well, I think that's right, but I think that you actually have to do more to be a green community.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, to be an MVP community, you apply for the planning grant, which enables you to hire an MVP certified consultant who comes in and does a community workshop basically and writes a report. So it's not a huge lift to become an MVP certified community, whereas green communities requires a lot more commitments and you know, it's definitely more work.
Yep. And probably a different mindset for some of the communities that are going after the MVP funding than go after a green community designation.
Right.
If there are opportunities to do some of that planning with other towns, I know the state likes regional projects, so that would be something to think about.
Yep. Good point.
That's too bad, because I heard that at the chair's breakfast this morning, they were saying Nagog Pond is not servicing the Concord right now. And so there's you know, work with Acton on Nagog Pond. I know that's fraught with political problems, but there's a water integration.
Careful, Brian.
Yeah.
Hey, Kate, as a source of funding, have you heard anything from the investor-owned utilities about opening up the solicitation to work more closely with their communities? They did this once, right? And
the community initiative?
Yeah.
Or is this something different?
No, this would be the community initiative.
We did the community initiative in 2019, 2018. We did in that with National Grid.
Right, and I was hearing maybe that they might be opening that up again, which would be a source of funding for communities to, work with the investor-owned utilities. I didn't know whether you had any insight on that.
I haven't. I don't know if they'd let you participate again. I mean, it was a very limited funding and a very narrow scope when we participated. So unless it was broader and more money, it probably wouldn't rise to the top of the list, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next topic on the agenda, which is the Rmi Accelerator. I wanted to have Kate and Alice help inform CAB about, in general, what this effort is. We talked about it at our last meeting, but RMI hadn't met yet, and now they've at least had the first meeting. So we want to know, I have an update on what that is.
Yeah, so I can just give a little context, and Alice, feel free to chime in. So at our last meeting, we shared that we're participating in this accelerator with RMI that's bringing together communities in Massachusetts to look at our legal options for building electrification, especially in light of the Brookline decision, which we talked about last time. So since we last met, there was an RMI meeting, and they went over some of those legal pathways, which include things like resolutions, home rule petition, and zoning changes. So now we're taking a look as a Concord group at some of the more of the details of those, and thinking about a multi-pronged strategy that we might want to approach. And Pam Hill is in the group as well. So Alice, Pam, do you guys want to add anything as far as where we're at?
Alice is the lead, and I think it would be great if she talked about it. If there's more to say.
Alice, you're muted.
Alice, you're muted.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike, was that from one room to the other?
Yes, it was.
Sorry.
It's always nice to have another family unit that does this.
That's right. Right.
Well, I wanted to make all of you disappear so I could see the document, and when I did that, I lost the little mute thing. Sorry. So the one thing that was clear is that there's no slam dunk approach that's going to get us where we want to be. So I thought the legal analysis on each of these options was quite thorough. Although it was a touch disappointing that there wasn't a clear path for us to take. I think our best strategy, our group met last Friday. We submitted additional questions to RMI to consider for our next meeting next week. Hopefully they'll provide us with some detailed answers about how we can move forward. We had specific questions about how far we could stretch our zoning codes and whether they had modeled the equity issues involved with electrification in other communities that may not be as wealthy as we are and be able to afford this, because a winning strategy will have to address the equity issue across all communities in Massachusetts. So the idea of a local resolution is, I put that one in the category of low-hanging fruit. It's an opportunity for us to join an effort with up to 24 other communities that begin to state a community interest to the state legislature about what we want to see happen at the state level that would allow us to operate more independently, meeting the state goals as well as our local goals for greenhouse gas emission reductions. So while the impact of that is non-binding, if you had 20 towns, maybe more, who sign on to a local resolution, it becomes the message that you send to the legislature. So in and of itself doesn't change policy, but it can influence it. So there's a real push for that across all of the other communities that we think about how to engage our own towns in a non-binding resolution. I think zoning authority is probably our strongest hook. We did pass a town meeting this year, language that requires sustainability metrics, including energy efficiency in new construction for PRDs. And that's a step in the direction that I think other communities are also looking at, how you can regulate development or influence development by local initiatives. So one of the questions we asked RMI is, will we, if we were to set local performance standards for new construction, would we open ourselves to potential litigation because in order to meet those energy standards, essentially you might need to require, the only response would be in building electrification. And is that a de facto ban on gas infrastructure? And so hopefully we'll have a response from RMI in the next week or so. Home rule petition, we've done that before in Concord, as you know. We just did it on tax relief. But it has its own problems. We might be able to get legislative approval for us to set our own energy agenda in our communities, but we'd still run up against the same problems that we've had with the Brookline decision, that they're still contradicting state legislation that would prevent us from doing what we want to do. So not until we change state law will we be able to actually enforce something at the local level. There was an interesting comment about a legal precedent that has never been tried with the Green Communities Act. The language of the Green Communities Act says that it requires that, quote, all new residential construction over 3,000 square feet and all new commercial and industrial real estate construction to minimize to the extent feasible the life cycle cost of the facility by utilizing energy efficiency, water conservation, and other renewable and alternative energy technologies. So the Green Communities Act says that no community has yet tried to do an ordinance of any sort using that as the precedent language for us to be able to do what we want to do in banning or banning expansion of infrastructure in Concord. So that carries with it a great deal of risk. We could lose, we could be sued. Certainly the industry groups would come after us saying, look, the state law is the state law, no matter what, it's still there. So it would be a novel approach and we'd be the first to try it. If we were to prevail, we would actually be in a good position to start looking at adoption across the Commonwealth and other communities under the Green Communities Act. It's a long shot, could be expensive, and we could lose. And then I think that part of our strategy, no matter what, is that we need to catalyze state action, and that's supporting statewide climate organizations, doing the work that your group, the CAB does, and other groups in town have done for a very long time, and to track legislation that can influence the outcome of state law. And so I think later in today's agenda, you'll talk about a letter to the conference committee on the roadmap bill, and that would be part of what this approach would be. So I think that's a brief summary of all of the legal pathways that are under consideration. And I think that we'll most likely choose more than one to follow, because not one of these will get us where we want to be. But we haven't actually finalized our own thinking on how we're going to go about that until we get some clarification from RMI.
Well, that's great. That's a great update. Is there anything, Pam or Kate, that you'd like to add?
No, I thought that was really great. Really summarized everything very thoroughly and clearly.
Yeah, I agree. I think Alice's take that there's no kind of perfect solution, right, is really the key takeaway, in that it's going to involve a multi-pronged approach to really get the results that we want to see.
When the subcommittee met, one of the other things I think, and Alice alluded to this already, is the potential promise of setting performance standards and perhaps looking at our our planning board and institutionalizing it so it's integrated. And that has complexities as well. But it did perhaps give us a little bit of a pathway on, essentially from what RMI presented, we need to think a little bit more strategically of where we're going to go from here, because they're frankly, a little bit stuck.
So that was the thing when I heard those options listed. I was surprised that setting performance targets was going to be such an issue, because setting performance targets allows flexibility in design, which, you know, code is about making design more rigid. It's about, these are the safety things you have to do something safely. So I don't necessarily see them as the same. I think performance targets is a good way forward, but I am not educated on the legal side of all of this, which is where we're running into the big issues. So
that's where we've asked for clarification from RMI. If we were to set, say, a EUI of some standard for new construction, and the only way to get there would be through a building all electric construction, would we therefore be instituting a ban on fossil fuel infrastructure by requiring such a high EUI? And so that's what the question is.
Well, what if the it's the only by electrifying is the part that I think is I don't see how it has to be only by electrifying. You could set very stringent performance targets, and you may be able to do it in ways that are not with just electricity. Go ahead, John. I see your hand.
Yeah, I think some community, I mean, it's a dicey legal situation, but some communities are trying to, you know, basically skirt this conflict with the building code by focusing on emissions, since the building code is silent on that. So I don't know if that's been asked of RMI.
To have set a emissions target for a building's operation?
Energy?
That's a really good
idea.
Question.
Right. So yeah, in Cambridge, we're doing a non-zoning ordinance built off our energy use disclosure ordinance that would set performance targets based on emissions. I think this is the way Boston is going as well. But you could do it in zoning too. Setting it as performance is, I think, difficult in zoning, because I think it's hard to enforce performance under zoning. I mean, other people would know better than I on that, but it seems to me you could set emission design standards.
And is that language that Cambridge has already crafted, that there is a team participating from Cambridge on the Rmi Accelerator?
Yeah, it's probably, I think it's Seth. Yeah, you could talk to Seth about it.
Okay.
I mean, we're trying to work through the non-zoning ordinance with the law departments. I don't know that he would circulate that, but he could at least tell you the principles.
Don,
there are some net zero emission zoning. I should be more up to date on it, but I'm not focusing on this as much. There's some zoning, net zero emission zoning amendments as well to get at new development. So Seth could talk to you about that.
Okay, I'll call. Thank you.
Are the performance and monitoring, I guess, regimens in place that you can track, you know, if you set a target for emissions, that you can then measure against that? And maybe that's the same question for the other performance targets we were talking about, but.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a non-zoning ordinance, I think it's easier to enforce. I mean, there's still some issues about how you penalize violations. because of the way that state laws govern that kind of enforcement action. In zoning, it's harder because once you issue the permit and they build it, I mean, you know, if they don't perform, then I think under zoning, it's hard to kind of go back and make them do something. If you have a non-zoning ordinance, you can prescribe some measures that if they're not meeting a standard, they have to do certain things like, you know, retune-ups or retrofits of certain types. I think that might be harder to do under zoning.
That's a great idea, though. A great approach.
Yeah, I'll call Seth. Thank you.
I mean, and so I mean, the other thing, the comment I wanted to make is just thinking about sort of the, you know, where the town wants to put its emphasis. So I don't know how much more new development we're, you know, expecting and how much of the building stock we would affect through these efforts versus thinking about what we're going to do about the existing building stock.
That's the next big hurdle. I think the numbers are small, 14 new houses average a year, and most of those are tear downs,
Yeah.
unless we have one large major development,
Yeah.
like the one in West Concord.
Right.
But when you amortize that over time, it's about 14 houses per year of new construction. So you're right, existing housing stock is the next big hurdle. And maybe we do the same thing if we're successful with new buildings to be able to work towards performance standards on building renovations of older homes.
Yeah.
I think that was part of the logic on the Article 40 is if we could get confidence that we have the ability to influence, you know, the new construction market in that direction, how might that help and teach us for, like Alice says, the other 93% of emissions contributions in the existing buildings? And we're puzzled by that right now.
I mean, there is an argument to make about sort of starting with existing buildings. So if, say, the town had an ordinance that affected existing buildings, well, any new development's going to become an existing building, right?
Right.
So if they know they're going to become subject to performance requirements under that approach, then, and you know that in advance, it makes sense to design the project to meet those requirements in the first place, right? Not that people would always do that. But.
Yeah, but I think that if you start with existing buildings setting a performance target, it's going to have to be more laxed than if you started with new construction and set a performance target. I think that you get a much stronger target starting with new construction, because you think about the age of houses in Concord. And
yeah, I mean, it's harder with residential, small residential, just because you're dealing with families and individual lives and so forth, as opposed to a developer, right?
Well, happily, Sept has been doing the pamphlet. Kate, what's the name of that? They did the cross out, and I always forget the name.
Your sustainable home now.
Your sustainable home now. And that is to educate residents on what they can do in their own home for existing buildings, whether it be heat pumps, electric hot water heaters, or things like that. So I think those educational efforts and any kind of incentives the light plan can put around those can really help attack the residential sector, which is going to be the hardest. And I think there should be complement of commercial efforts for existing commercial buildings to upgrade. And I've always thought that there should be an effort to work with residents to make an energy plan. They've got a hot water heater that works now, and it's running on oil, and they decide, when I replace this, I'm going to get an electric one. And then a year later, in the middle of the night, it stops working. They need hot water to take a shower, so they just call the plumber, and the plumber says, I can just replace it with a new oil one, less than 24 hours. And then they're like, oh, but I want to do electric, and I have to research it and find the right installer. An energy plan is you do all that research, and then you tape it to the device. And when the device fails, you go, oh, this is what I remembered I was going to go do. And you call that guy and you do it. It's things like that that CSEC can really help work with citizens on.
Yeah.
Brian, I'm going to have to cut out, so I'm just going to.
Okay.
I hope you've got your quorum, and I hope everybody is good. Thank you. See ya.
Thanks,
Hey,
Pam.
Pam.
Hi, Pam.
I mean, I think I think our inventory says our larger buildings are the majority of the emissions from building energy use, right?
Like 50-50.
Yeah, it's split 50-50. There's a lot more residential buildings, but the energy consumption's 50-50.
I think there's some paths to being more stringent with commercial developments and setting performance standards that are kind of science-based, so maybe you don't have to go all electric or zero emissions all at once, but it can be staged. It's still a problem with the smaller buildings, I think, and I don't know that anyone has a big approach on that. I think from experience that education and incentives go some other way, but not a long way. And so we're still going to need something else, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I know that there's an effort for, I guess the light plant is going to have heat pump coaches, and that will help a lot, because that's what I find people really respond to and take action is hand holding through the process.
Yeah, we've had that for solar and for heat pumps in Cambridge.
Okay. Alice or Kate, anything else on RMI do you think we should go over? Looks like, what was that?
No.
No? All right. So are we ready to move on to the letter? A vote on letter for support for net zero stretch code. This was part of the packet. Everybody have a chance to read it? I skimmed it. I didn't have a chance to get in the detail, and honestly, I tend not to follow what's happening with bills at the State House, so I'm not the expert on the details. So I think it sounds good. Yeah, and so Alice and John drafted this. Would either of you like to talk about it before we discuss it? John, you're muted.
Yep, sorry.
There we
Yeah,
go.
I was just trying to pull the letter up, but yeah, Alice started the letter and I basically added some details to it. So I think it's mostly supportive of elements that are in the Senate and House versions. When I looked through the bills, I mean, I thought they were actually fairly different. So I tried to pull out some things to emphasize like the building energy use disclosure or benchmarking piece. There is in the House version setting emission goals for municipal light plants. So that's pulled out. But yeah, mostly it's to support and highlight the things that sounded good, at least for us, I think.
Does anyone else, any of the other members of CAB have comments on this letter? Mike?
Oh, I thought that, we've been talking about net zero and setting that standard for some time. I think it was manifesting the support that it makes a whole lot of sense to go this next level. So I was very much in support of the letter.
Yeah.
Can I offer that if you all decide that this letter makes sense, I mean, I would also suggest that the new chair of the Climate Action Advisory Board bring it to the select board and see if we wouldn't, and ask us if we might not want to send it as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
That's a great idea, Jane.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I ask a question? What happens, the interim goals in 5-year increments? What what happens if we don't hit those? Is there any teeth to this? Or is it just kind of trying to help people sort of take it in bite-sized chunks?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Alice knows, but I think it's more of a disclosure effort of sort of making the state put it out there so, you know, the public can see where we're at and then rely on public pressure if we're not hitting our targets. There were differences between the House and Senate versions. I think the House version only required reporting every 10 years and the Senate was every 5 years. So I know a lot of environmental organizations are supporting the more frequent reporting, which to me makes sense, just because there's so much to do and we have to keep up the pace.
And every 5 years is still quite a long time to wait for the next.
Yeah. But no, just, I mean, I think it's a great letter. I support.
It allows for progress updates. So you can look at, is the state making progress towards its 10-year goal by having more frequent reporting?
Yeah, okay.
Anyone else have comments on the letter?
I approve.
Okay. Well, why don't you make a motion, Brian?
Okay, I move that we, how am I the wording here?
Approve the letter to move to the select board.
Move that we approve the letter to the select board.
I'd second that.
Great. We'll do a wave of hands. Everybody who agrees that we're ready to move it to the select board and ask for them to pass it on. That looks like we're unanimous. Excellent. Look at that. We're getting things done. Yeah, Alice,
Can I ask a question? So we're moving this to the select board, but
it's written in our voice, but Jane
Okay.
had suggested that the select board be part of this.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
So I think the idea would be that we would allow the select board to review it and potentially suggest edits and add hopefully the select board's
support
to the letter. So it's both from the select board
Got it.
and then CAB and then send it out.
Is that the
Thank
idea,
you.
Jane?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, a letter from the select board to Senator Barrett et al. Would be, you know, addressed from the select board, but it certainly could be written as on behalf of the select board and the Climate Action Advisory Committee of Concord, blah, 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 blah.
Carries a little bit more weight.
Right.
Courtney, sorry, Alice.
So I have a question. If the select board chooses not to act, is this board going to bring it back for further discussion, or could you have a motion that says, should the select board choose not to act, the CAB will submit the letter on the CAB's behalf?
I'm suspecting that the select board will support this. If they don't, I think we should regroup and hear their feedback and then make a decision on how we move forward. I don't see that being the case. Jane, you've unmuted. Do you want to say something?
No, I was going to say if the select board is not successful in agreeing to support this, I think we have bigger problems. But I understand what Alice is getting at, which is don't lose the momentum. You know, if the select board drops the ball, don't drop it as CAB.
And I agree. I think that this board is very supportive of this effort, and we see the strategic value in it. So even if it was to be kicked back from the select board, we'd want to hear first what their reason was, but I think we would still move forward in some fashion. But that's my opinion. All right. Did we do the vote already? No, we got this. We got the motion, the second. All right. All those in favor?
We raised our hands.
We did vote.
We approved it.
We approved it. All right. So we did do that. All right. Next is Kate wanted to talk about starting the process of doing a planning for the greenhouse gas inventory.
Yeah, so just a little context. We did a greenhouse gas inventory for 2016 and 2008, which is our baseline. We did the 2016 inventory. We started that data collection in 2018. And we do have a 2020 goal in addition to our 2050 goal, which is why I'm bringing this up to get your thoughts on when we do an update to track progress towards that goal. And so the goal is a 25% reduction by 2020. So I'm going to share my screen. I just jotted down a few notes just to kind of organize my thoughts and hopefully will help with our discussion. But it looks like, give me a couple nods if you can see this little Word doc. Awesome. So, as I said, we did we have a 2016 inventory as the latest inventory that we have. We followed the global protocol for cities methodology for both the 2008 and the 2016 with some help from KLA in completing that one. I listed out here some of the kind of key data sets. This is obviously not all the data sets that go into the inventory, but these are what I see as kind of top of mind for me as the biggest data sets in terms of and what year we use for the 2016 inventory and what is most currently available as far as I know. And so, as you can see, most of them, pretty recent years are available except for the vehicles data. So I think that's kind of a big consideration. So some of the considerations that I've listed here in terms of thinking about what I've been thinking about in terms of when do we do this inventory update. Mapc just released a tool that follows the global protocol for cities, the same methodology we used for communities to make it easy to do greenhouse gas inventories. So we can use that to update it, which will be easier. We could do, I think, either a 2019 inventory to assess, our emissions reductions by 2020, that before 2020 mark, or we could do a 2020 inventory. Most of the buildings data is available like mid to late year of the following calendar year. So a 2020 data would be, likely available towards the end of next year. Or we could start working on probably the end of this year, the 2019 inventory. So I see those as kind of the key decision there. But what's really unclear is when there'll be an update to the Mapc vehicle census, which is the key data set for miles traveled. So, which of the vehicles registered in Concord, how many miles do they drive? And so the latest data set is still 2014. So if we use that data set, we won't really see any change or much change in our transportation emissions because that's what we used in our 2016. So I think it won't give us much of a comparison point.
Who at MAPC could we reach out to find out if they're going to update that ever?
I mean, I think it's not, as far as I know, it's not on that. It's not them. It's not MAPC that is slow. It's that they put that together from a data set from the RMV, as far as I know. John's nodding. Maybe he has more to add in there.
Yeah, I think that the problem is they get the data from the RMV, and when they get the data, there's an extensive amount of data cleaning they have to do. And the last time it took a long time for them to do. So, I suspect even if, I don't know if they're working on it now or what the plan is. So, I think it's worth asking MAPC what they think the status of the next, data set is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can reach out. I wasn't able to do that before this meeting, but I can definitely reach out. And if we want to, we don't have to make a decision on this today. I just wanted to start the conversation because it's been on my mind. And the last thing is just that we used a custom emissions factor for our electricity based on CMLP specific purchases in the last inventory. And that's something that we would need to update for a new inventory. So just throw this out there as something to consider if you have thoughts or guidance or strong feelings about when we should do this, and which data we should use. Happy to hear your advice.
Warren.
Yeah, I am would not be in a rush to get into this for a couple of reasons. The town spent a lot of time doing the last emissions inventory, measuring things. Then we've spent a lot of time planning. We need to get beyond measuring and planning to doing, and that should be our focus. And to the extent to which we start getting involved in trying to do an inventory, I think it would just take too much of your time. That's my first reason. And then the second thing, COVID-19 means that a lot of this data for 2020 in particular is going to be pretty weird and is not going to necessarily say much of anything about what the real trends are. We have some, basically dirty data because this is not a typical year, and next year is not going to be a typical year either.
Yeah, my opinion is I'm looking at the current data available column, and I'd like to see those as 2020. I think dealing with this topic in June of 2021 might be more appropriate because yes, it'll be dirty data, but it will be a conclusion of 2020 that we'll be measuring. And comparing that to 2016 and so forth. I also agree with Warren that we need to focus more on getting those blueprints and those implementation steps moving rather than going back and making sure we've got the inventory perfect.
And we already know from the greenhouse gas inventory, we know where the major sources of our opportunities are, right? They're in buildings and in transportation. And I think Warren's idea makes a whole lot of sense that we go back to both of those sectors and we now look at those actions that we defined around them and the blueprints, and we go to work executing on them. And then maybe later on we come back and look at the inventory and get that. But we'd be dividing our short-term turnaround of actually having an impactful, results with Article 51 if we spend most of our time continuing talking about measuring the inventory across these data sets. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts. So if the vehicle data isn't going to be available, then I think doing the full inventory might not be worth it. But if it's not a big lift, I think it would be useful to see the trends and the basic data. So where's our electricity, natural gas, and so forth. And even if COVID is skewing that, we don't know how permanent some of these changes are, how much more remote work people are going to be doing going forward compared to before, or how much we're just going to go back to the pre-existing normal. So I think it's still useful to see what that trend is, but I don't think it's worth it if it takes a lot of work on Kate's part to pull all of that together. But if it's getting a few numbers and putting them into a table and showing those trends, I think that's a good interim indicator that's useful. Then my other thought is, so in terms of emissions from electricity, this comes back to this issue I've raised before about the emissions factor. So when we did the inventory, first time, the base year was based on the ISO or the regional grid emissions factor. And then the next year, the interim year was based on the CMLP factor. And so in a way it was comparing apples to oranges. But there's still the discussion to be had about how the town is quantifying emissions from electricity and accounting for renewable energy and especially RECs. Because that's actually, you know, if we count it the way CMLP is counting it, then that reduces the town's emissions significantly. And I question whether that's a real reduction or not.
And I've promised you a full discussion on that at a future meeting, and I had to get through town meeting to put time towards it.
Not suggesting we have to do it right away, but I think
before the end of the year.
At some point.
Yeah, it's not only good for you, John, but it's good for everybody to go back to what is the clean energy plan for the town and go through all those details.
Right.
I understand the perspective of everyone else, and I would agree overall that we need to spend a lot more time trying to get more things done against the plan than measuring the emissions. But I do think it's really important that we have a sense of where we're trending, and I think it's really important that we have credible information on the 2020 goal as soon as we can, particularly for the data sources where, you know, we should be able to get the information. Like CMLP should be able to provide 2020 data less than halfway through 2021, in my opinion. And honestly, they should be, you know, they should be the ones pulling this together, not Kate. Like they should be responsible, at least for the electricity side, and pulling that carbon emissions information together and aligning with the GHG protocol and whatever protocols there are that, you know, until we ensure that they're taking some ownership of this, it's, you know, it's always going to be, you know, on Kate to kind of pull this together. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. And it doesn't align the incentives around what we're trying to get them to do. So, yeah, I think the challenge is what is the level of effort and how much support can we get, you know, from where can we, how easy is it to pull together these other data sources? Is there any way that CMLP can help support this going forward?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I've looked through the Mapc tool and I've gone to a webinar, and what I've been told is that it only takes a few hours, you know, to pull it together, because it's really built to make it as easy as possible. You know, I haven't dug in enough to confirm that is, you know, it would only be a few hours. So that's something I think it's definitely an important factor. You know, as far as the data currently available, I put 2019 in here for electricity because that's the last like full calendar year we can get. Obviously, you know, they can give us data, very current data, right? And we're lucky that we have CMLP because we can get much more current data on electricity than most other communities can get. It's just a matter of the national grid data, you know, what they have available on the Mass Save website is 2018. That's not to say we couldn't pester them for more current data. That I think that might be possible. So the CMLP data is the easiest and the most up to date to get. You know, and then I would say second to that is the assessor's database is also very easy to access. And is pretty frequently updated. And the WEAST data is also, they track that on a monthly and annual basis. So it's just a matter of like, at what point do we want to do it? And I think, you know, as John said, you know, the biggest factor to me is that we won't, without an update to the vehicles data, then that comparison isn't really one that we can make. But we can certainly look at the trends in electricity and natural gas, and that's possible whether we do a full inventory or not.
Is it, so I guess I leaned on the side of having that updated information for tracking. I mean, maybe it's not every year, but maybe it's every couple of years. I feel like these kind of 4 or 5 year stretches between, there's a lot, especially now that we have a plan for action, we want to move, we want to go forward. It's nice to have that feedback loop to know, you know, how we're doing. or not doing, how well we're not doing. So I wonder if this particular year, if there's an interim that we could, kind of figure out those processes we need and get those more streamlined so that it's easier to get that data. As you said, some sources are easy, and it's a phone call or it's an email, but maybe some of the others are not. I'm thinking specifically for the vehicle miles traveled, maybe we want to figure out a different way to get that data. Maybe we don't want to or can't even rely on MAPC because they may not do it. So do we want to look at a process as a town for getting that information so that we have better real time or more real time, I'll say, a feedback loop that we can draw upon. Maybe the time this year would be better spent in getting the processes in place than actually doing the estimate this year and maybe holding that for next year. If we can look at, as John suggested, some of the easy data and the trends there.
One thought on the vehicle miles traveled, but this is only residential, like excise taxes. Is there a way to send out, deploy some sort of survey and collect information on miles? And then for National Grid, is there any way that we can, through town legislation, say you have to give us this data every year by a certain date? Has any other community done that?
So I think Kate said that the collecting of the National Grid data she could do with just pinging them for not just the website, which is 2018, but actually making a request for 2019. She thinks she could do and get pretty quickly.
I mean, I said maybe that. Yes. I'm not confident that it could be. And I remember when we did the 2016 inventory, we asked for 2008 data to confirm an inventory that had been done by residents, and they said they didn't have that data, which I don't know how that's possible, but that's the response that we got. So I'm not overly confident in what we could get, but I would hope that we'd be able to get something more up to date than 2018.
I've seen Warren and now Brian want to pitch in, but I do want to make one other thing. As for decisions tonight on what we should do on this topic, I think clearly going to MAPC and getting a time frame from them on when they're going to update that vehicle miles traveled and where they are on that, I think is a definite thing. Because if we have knowledge of when that will become a 2020 update, then all the other four seem like easier data sets to get.
Agreed.
Now, Warren, you've been patient.
Yeah, I want to really completely change what I was saying before.
Okay.
If it really is true that this only takes a few hours, I would suggest it probably is a good idea to just get the low-hanging fruit using 2019 numbers, because we'd have it, and 2020 is going to be such a weird year. When we get around to doing 2020, it would be nice to know how does that really compare with a more typical year like 2019. But I wonder if there's a way to just give yourself, Kate, a time limit and say you'll put in 8 hours into this, and whatever we get in 8 hours, that'll be it, and we'll do a bigger effort some point in the future.
Perfect. Brian?
Yeah, so I'm of two minds on this one. And the backdrop here is I work at Wayfair. We're actually doing our first carbon footprint now. We had a meeting 2 hours ago that was on, and I'm doing a lot of the data for that.
Great.
And I've also done a lot of benchmarking in the past. One is I agree that we don't need to focus on measuring because we've got to focus on doing. On the other hand, if you only collect data every 5 years, there's a lot of informational entropy, where you call National Grid, it's a new person you're talking to, and there's no record of ever giving, there's things are not necessarily comparable. Whereas if you collect data every day, every week, every month, every quarter, whatever the right frequency is, there has to be a process to support that, and that process might get documented along the way, and then you get data that's clean and repeatable. So I think there's a lot of merit in that. And in theory, if the data is coming more frequently, it should be easier because if it's difficult, it'll drive everyone crazy. So I'm more interested in the process than the actual numbers anytime soon. And just like, having documentation on our end, who we contacted, details of what's in, what's out, I think are important to get like a good number moving forward.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of, when we went through this process a year ago or a year and a half ago, I think Kim's group really did a good job of documenting the process of data collection with the understanding that this would be repeated in the future. But we knew that using this vehicle miles traveled was a great data set that we got a hold of that was somewhat relevant to 16. And we knew it was going to have trouble with it now. And just we're there. So Mike, did you unmute because you wanted to make a comment?
No, but I will anyway.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, we're not the only community doing this, right? Kate, is there anything to be gained by the insights of what all of these other communities around us are doing in their plans with respect to setting the data sets or,
I mean, that's exactly the reason MAPC has developed this tool and gone through the initiative to streamline the process, because everybody's trying to do
something different.
And most communities like ours have one person like me trying to do it.
Right.
Their tool does like pull in, like it's built for a 2017 inventory, and it includes everything, all the data sets for 2017, and you just kind of like drop down and pick your and say yes and no. If you want to do a different year, you have to do a little bit more work. But that's exactly the purpose of their initiative, is to try to collect, make it as streamlined and as comparable as possible, so that you can also compare community to community and add them up. And
nice. Yeah. And then it would afford us the time to get into executing rather than spending our time coming up with new protocols for measuring.
Exactly.
Excellent.
So Kate, well,
thank you all.
Yeah, you feel you've got a good amount of info on where the board is?
This is really helpful to hear your thoughts on. I think you kind of mentioned all the things that have been rolling around in my head, so really good to get your input. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear what Warren had said earlier, which is we've done the data set gathering, we've made the plan. We need to spend more time on making the actions happen, and that's really what I want to see this group do as much as possible in the future. So it's 7:19 and it's 7:15 on our agenda. We're a little bit later on the agenda, but town meeting. So we got through town meeting. The town, after 9 months, finally completed town meeting. And Article 30 passed. Some other articles that we had seen and were in favor of passed, but a lot got bumped. For Article 40 got pushed to next year with RMI stepping in, and we had other efforts go that way as well. But I wanted to talk about what do we want to do for the next town meeting. Is there something within our blueprints that we feel requires action at town meeting? Do we feel there is something that that's the correct process for and we should be thinking about? I don't want to use town meeting every time we want to get something done because that's not appropriate, but it is a good tool for certain efforts. Does anyone have any opinions about the town meeting that just happened, or any opinions on efforts that you think town meeting would be useful for in our plan?
I was thoroughly pleased with this town meeting. There are a couple articles, particularly one was mentioned earlier about the planning around the Thoreau district and opening it up to more automobiles. And it was supported by for good reasons. You know, the fire department, police department felt that there were safety issues there, and there are. But both the select board and the planning board came down on essentially adding more parking and a few other things, which was their insights. But what came from the body was to look at it more comprehensively. And
Yep.
it was almost a unanimous vote to say, I think we can do better than that. And that is going to come up in the next one. So I thought that was, you know, encouraging to me to see that our democratic process works. And
Well,
surprises
I
us.
was,
But
yeah, the concept of don't do, you know, don't make this little correction here, that little correction there, but stop, take a holistic view of
Right.
that business district and think about mobility, safe mobility through there. You know, complete streets, entrances and exits with traffic being cars or people walking or people biking. Yeah, I think that was great. I know personally, I was working at the primary. I was working as an election officer to help people vote, and I was talking with the two policemen that were there, and both of them commented about how many bikes they see in Concord. I mean, they just constantly see bikes on the roads in Concord, going through Concord, but yet we don't have a lot of infrastructure dedicated to bikes. And the Complete Streets effort was something that was to help address that. I don't know if we need town meeting to address that going forward in our action plan, but that's something to look at. Is I just wanted to bring up the topic. We don't have to make any decisions about what we feel should go to the next town meeting. I do know that the town moderator this morning said that she's hoping a town meeting would happen not in April, but more like May or June, which because it would be more in the summer and she feels COVID won't be done. So that would be her reasoning. But yeah, it's still, this town meeting process took so long that we're almost rapidly approaching the next one.
mhm.
Is there anything in the plan that is explicit about needing town meeting action?
I would love to say I prepared for the meeting in that way, John, but I didn't.
There's nothing that says town meeting, but certainly, you know, one of the actions around, you know, what we were talking about earlier with policies for buildings, right? It suggests policies, right? But not specifically town meeting.
Well, there's like the benchmarking ordinances in there, right?
Yeah, so
Town meeting action.
right. I think a lot of things require town meeting to pass.
And maybe it's just a running agenda item that we have, you know, as we're talking implementation of the plan and specific actions, that we make sure to check in and remind ourselves that, you know, it could be a potential or maybe not, or we need to check into it, just so we don't lose sight of that.
Well, could we make a list of what's in the plan that infers town meeting? And then we can decide, well, does it make sense to move that forward, any of those forward now, or we think we should wait?
Yeah.
You know, I think if we look at the actions we've built in the plan around buildings, right? Certainly Article 40, that it's an indirect approach for supporting the plan going forward with the notion of looking at the new construction markets first as the source for greenhouse gas reductions. That gets us aligned with Article 51. So I'm hopeful that when we go out next year, if we're looking for ideas, is to revisit Article 40 with a better understanding of the landscape as we've learned from others and certainly through RMI, and have that on our almost near-term agenda as the first start before we dive in necessarily to existing homes and existing buildings, because that's so much more complicated. But I think the work done up until this point is giving us encouragement that we really had done our homework And we stood a very good chance. And I got the sense at town meeting as well that, you know, this is not going to be a difficult article to pass. It's probably going to be a difficult article to restructure and try to maybe get it within the planning group, right? Where this becomes institutionalized within our business, within the town, rather than a subset of something that we all know is worthy because it answers Article 51. And that gives us a better strategy going forward.
I agree, Mike. So I'm flipping through the plan here, and by the way, Kate, the printouts of the climate action plan, is that still going to happen, or?
Well, I had no budget until Sunday, so
Okay, that's it. All right.
it's on the list.
She was so nice to actually print out one for me and 3-hole punch it so I could get it in a binder. It was great. It was very useful. But as I flip through it, what I'm seeing here are things like increased use of public transportation and other low carbon, non-carbon transportation options. That could include complete streets. That could be something like a town deciding to do a shuttle service, similar like Crosstown Connect or Lexington Express. Then, you know, improve accessibility, connectedness between bicycle and walking paths and sidewalks. And then there's forest management, there's topics there. There's so many topics that could go to town meeting, but I don't know if they should. So I agree, John, it would be great to have a list of saying, here's an implementation step that we need a policy that probably needs approval from town meeting, and get those ideas going. Maybe we could all flip through the plan, and if you want to, you could email me and Kate with either the implementation steps or the actions you think that there might be some kind of town meeting article related to, and we could cobble together a list to review and keep in mind as we go forward. Warren, is that too much?
I think that's great, but a reminder, Brian, you're not chair anymore.
That's right. Jake, you decide.
I was just writing that down as an order for me to follow through on as a favor to Brian. So happy to. I think that makes sense. That, and you can just, you know, you can include Brian as well, but you can send it to Kate and myself.
Oh, send it to Kate and Jack. Don't worry about me. I'm good.
You know, what would be great about our engagement plan is that and we talked about this earlier, that this board can be advisors. And how cool would it be as we look at these blueprints and we look at these different actions we're taking, where we've identified the champions, whether it's the planning board director, whether it's the director of this or somebody else within the business, within the town, that we support them. And they are the ones that elect to actually, you know, bring it to town meeting. So it isn't CAB that's always doing, you know, this is a great article. We really think you guys should do this, where we become more integrated. And that would be a terrific way to build consensus.
Well, Michael, I think you saw that with Article 40, right? It was
exactly
really scoped and designed and written by a group of residents, and then the select board actually like took it on to, you know,
right. It's powerful when the leadership takes it on and presents it rather than the advisors.
Mm-hmm. John?
Well, so I guess in the vein of trying to think comprehensively, would it make sense for the board to develop like a work plan for itself as to what is it? And there's a lot in the plan. There's a lot in the plan. We can't focus on everything at once.
Oh, so, no, I think this would be just a quick list to put down some ideas.
Right. But there might, in terms of the things we work on and what Kate decides to focus on, you know, there may be a lot of things to do that we wouldn't do through town meeting. And it would be good to know what those things are versus the town meeting things. So like, if there are some things in the plan that are for town meeting, like the benchmarking ordinance, I think it's a clearer path to how you might draft that. Some of the other recommendations, we actually have to figure out how you put them into action, right? What's the right vehicle? And that's a lot more work, I think. And so it seems like it would be helpful to have some kind of work plan that sort of gives us some direction of what to focus on over the next year. And we might decide, well, we're not going to do town meeting next time just because there's a lot of other things to do instead.
Well, as we're talking about what CAB will do in the future, I think at this point I should probably let Jake run that expectation setting. So
Yeah, I mean, I really like that idea. I think we can use what's in the plan, where CAB plays a key role, right? So we play a key role in buildings. And so I think there's more work that we need to do in terms of being a champion and figuring out what the priorities are and where we need to influence, but then also outside of that, kind of connecting with Kate and other folks across the town to understand where can we help influence, where can we help guide town staff or guide the conversation and engage so that we can hopefully see the kinds of progress that we'd like to see and support Kate in her efforts to influence and bring the plan to life. So I think some sort of work plan, or that sounds a little scary to me, but some sort of guiding document to help us kind of stay focused. And then also ideally, for folks to kind of sign up for certain engagements. I know Brian brought this up earlier, and I know there's some mixed feelings about it, but we may be well served by having folks who go to other meetings and engage with those those departments or those other boards, so that we have a little bit more of a connection and can really work through. That person can become a little bit more of an expert on a specific issue that they're passionate about and report back to us. So I think we need to have those kind of conversation of what's next and how do we bring this plan to life.
I'll just offer, I guess, an agreement on that. The idea of going to some of the champions. I chair a sustainability committee for our wastewater professional organization, and I think the biggest challenge that we've had is, I think people are willing, but they won't necessarily come to you. So there's many chairs on this committee, and we're just one of them. And we'd love to see these other committees, kind of implement sustainable principles in what they're doing, in the influences they have. They're willing, they just, they don't always know what that means. They need some education around it or some advice, So I think this group, if we can figure out the bandwidth and the actual, how to implement it reasonably, I think it makes a lot of sense, and we could serve that role hopefully effectively. So I just offer that.
I completely agree. The difficulty has been getting members to find free time to do that.
Exactly.
I think now with so many meetings being on Zoom, the answer might be different than it was a year ago when we were trying to do that.
I think before we can go to other boards and organizations, we have to know what the ask is, I guess.
I don't
agree.
I think attending those meetings and listening, getting up to speed on what they're doing and what their struggles are, and just being there is a good starting point. I don't think we have to go in with an agenda.
I mean, I think Jake was suggesting maybe focusing on an area like buildings.
Yeah.
So it seems to me if we could figure out like the 3 things that would be more important to do sooner rather than later, that gives us something to talk about. Otherwise, especially when you're talking to people who aren't immersed in this stuff every day, they don't really know what it is they might do. And so I think we could play a role in seeding ideas with other groups, but we have to know what those seeds look like. And so I think if we could do some work ourselves on that, then it would be productive.
All right. So that was, this last agenda item was to get these kind of ideas, and I think we've done a good job of that. I don't think we have to drive this to an action list or anything like that. Any other comments on what happened at town meeting, or ideas for the next one, or any other general ideas about this liaison with other committees? And I think we've reached public comment, but I don't see any public. So
Did the 6 o'clock scare them off, or the 8 o'clock? One of those.
I don't. What was the public? So we had.
Was there a separate process that we had to email them the link, or it was more the meeting packet that I think was brought up last time that they couldn't access, right? So it's just
So
they know this is happening at this time, and we just they haven't.
I sent an email to quite a lot of people, as I normally do, a lot of the advocates, and I in that email was a link to this packet that we all received, as well as the agenda that was attached.
Okay.
So yeah, it just must have been an inconvenient time.
Sounds like we can adjourn maybe early for the.
I think so.
For the first time.
First time. That's establishing a precedent.
I've been on. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. And a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks, all. Thanks,
Have a
Brian.
good night.
Good night.